Okay, I'm a little concerned about the energy in the room. You know, it seems a little flat. No, seriously. I'm excited to be here. It sounds like you guys are excited to be here. We passed out all the handouts we had. If people are willing to share. If there's an extra lying around, maybe it can get passed. Okay, well, let's get started. We are here to talk about decodable and leveled readers and using them appropriately. Cell phones, please. Of course, we're here because it's about the kids. That's why we do this. And, whoa, wrong button. Sorry. This is not my clicker. I got to get used to it. Okay. Those of you that, I think most everybody had handouts. There are going to be a couple of slides in here that have a red title. They're slides I threw in at the last minute, or they may be answer slides to something if I ask questions. Otherwise, you have pretty much every slide. Through Reading League, we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the handouts if they need them. Objectives, I'm not going to go through the objectives, but we are going to first, before we talk about decodable and leveled readers, guys, I have to introduce you to a little piece of research. Because the research frames what we do, and if you understand the research, the rest of it sort of unfolds. So how many people here know about and are fairly conversant with the simple view of reading? Okay, awesome. That is probably one of the most hands up I've ever gotten to that question. So maybe I'm talking to the choir, but hang with me. Because usually, I got to tell you guys, when I ask that question, at best I get one or two hands out of a room this big. It's that, Mark talked about this non-communication issue we have between research and the classroom. And the simple view is a seminal piece of research about reading that the reading research world just takes for granted, but teachers don't know about. So I'm excited that a bunch of you know about it. But that will set us up for thinking about decodable and leveled readers and how to use them appropriately. So to get us started thinking, I want you guys to think for a minute. What is reading? If I asked you for a quick definition of reading, jot something down, and I'm going to call on a couple people, because I do that. Okay, before I call on people, anybody want to volunteer? No confidence here. Lots of energy, but no confidence. Or am I not giving you enough time? Maybe? More time. Okay, you don't have to, write a thesis. Just if you had to sum it up. Okay, we have a volunteer.
Construction of meaning from the printed word.
Okay, awesome. I like that. You guys like that? Anybody want to add anything to that? Yes, ma'am.
Successful decoding and fluency that allows for comprehension of text.
Okay, I like that. Anybody want to add anything to that one? Okay, I love it. You guys hit what we need to cover. We need to talk about meaning, because that's the goal. We need to talk about understanding, and we need to talk about getting the print off the page so that we can do those things, right? So that sets us up for the simple view, but here is another piece of research that's not so simple. This is a complex view of the world of reading. And I'm not going to take you through this research, but we use it as a map because it's kind of interesting. Basically what's going on here is all of those circles represent things that we can assess about reading, different aspects that go into the reading process. And what the researchers were doing with this was looking at effect sizes and saying which affects the other, how are they related, what will predict something else, and hence all the arrows. But what I want you to take from this is notice that we got lots of arrows pointing to lots of different things, but in the end, when we get out here to the goal, reading comprehension, okay, there's only two arrows, one coming from here and one coming from there. So if we want good reading comprehension, all of the stuff that has to go on goes through two gateways to get to the final product. And they are language comprehension. And by language comprehension, we mean oral language. Can you understand the spoken language? And how well can you do that? The second gate is context-free word identification. According to researchers, you all know it as decoding. So you guys nailed it. Decoding, comprehension come together, and we get reading comprehension. But let's think about those terms for a second. And the first one, oops, come back here. I want to talk about is language comprehension. So simply put, language comprehension is the ability to understand spoken language, oral language. Can you do that? The next one is decoding. And decoding, as you all know, is your ability to look at print and figure out what the word that print represents is. You can read nonsense words, so it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with meaning. It's just literally, what are the sounds that the letters are representing? How do I pronounce it? And then, whoops, sorry guys, I should have brought my own clicker. Get used to this. They're all different. Then we have reading comprehension. And that's the ability to understand language through print. Now, how do we get the language from the print? What do we have to have? Decoding. You got it. So now you guys are set for the simple view. So language comprehension, the content or the information is going to get into the brain through the ears. You hear the language and you understand it. When we talk about reading comprehension, it has to come in through the eyes from print, which means we have to be able to translate the print or decode it. Now, there's a bunch of skills though, and remember we had a complex map, and so if we go backwards from that, what do we need for decoding? And you guys all know this, but we need to be skilled with the sight words, have our sight words under our belt so that we can be fluent. We need to have the phonics to decode unfamiliar words or to reasonably decode unfamiliar words so that we can figure out what the words are. And on the language comprehension side, guys, we have to have a whole ton of things. You have to have your vocabulary and your background knowledge. You have to have, which I don't think you can separate those two. That should be one thing. Because if you know about the vocabulary, you're learning about background knowledge. If you are learning about a content area, you're going to be acquiring vocabulary. They go together. And it's really not background knowledge either, but these are the terms that were handed down to us. It's just what do you know, okay? You need to know how the language works. You have to understand language structures. You need to have the ability to verbally reason. You have to be able to use language to think. But notice, this is all stuff you could do even if you can't read. Understanding story structure, genre, all of those sort of things will enhance your ability to understand spoken language, because if I read a story to you, if you know how stories normally work and you know all the little elements that build your story structure, you will be able to comprehend faster and easier how the story is unfolding and what you need to get from it. And of course, higher order reasoning skills, and there's probably more that you guys could add to the list. So we've got a very complex set of skills here. Now, language comprehension, guys, is never done, hopefully. We are all learning today, I hope. I'm learning, you're learning, we're all learning. We will continue to learn as long as we're alive and thinking. But decoding is a discrete or fixed set of skills. Once you can accurately decode fluently, it's done. We've taught it, we've got it, and unless we inflict brain damage, it doesn't go away, and you can't turn it off. If I put print up here and just didn't call attention to it, but your eyes fell on it, your brain will start decoding it automatically. Even if it's another language, you'll try to decode it. When you, as good decoders, see print, your brain starts kicking in to decode and does the best it can. You can't turn it off. So kids tell you, or if you're thinking they're not trying, but they're not decoding, it's not because they can. You just can't not do it if you can do it. Okay, so this sets us up for thinking about this piece of research called the simple view of reading. And as I said, it's a given in the world of reading research now. It's been proven literally hundreds of times. People have tried to add to it, take away from it, disprove it, you name it. But it just falls out that you can trust the simple view of reading. It was a formula introduced by Goff and Tunmer in 1986, and what they were trying to do was answer the question, how important is decoding to reading comprehension? We all know that reading comprehension is the goal. There was argument back in 1986, and probably still is today, about how important decoding is. And they said, let's see. And what they proposed was that if I know your decoding score, and I take that times your ability or your language comprehension, so if I have a score or a rating for your ability to understand spoken language, and I know how good your decoding is, I can predict what your reading comprehension score will be. So they turned reading into a little math formula, which is kind of weird, but it works. So the formula is we have decoding, and it's times, guys. It's a times relationship. It's not plus, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Bear that in mind. So everybody say decoding times language comprehension.
Decoding times language comprehension.
Predicts reading comprehension. Okay? Now, the formula, they proposed it in 1986. They did a 4-year study, Hoover and Goff did, published it in 1990, and the correlations that they produced were very, very high. In other words, most of the time, if I had a decoding score and a language comprehension score, I could predict your reading score pretty closely, your comprehension score. Now, what you need to understand about how this formula works is the variables in the equation, D, LC, and RC, cannot be any greater than 1. What's the best score you can get on a test? 100, unless we have bonus points or something. But, 100%, 100%. So in the formula, 100% becomes 1. So the best that decoding can be is 1. The best that language comprehension can be is 1. And what's 1 times 1, guys? 1. So that's pretty straightforward. So if we want good reading comprehension, we have to have really good decoding, really good language comprehension, and the product of those will be good reading comprehension. But what if one of those variables is not 100%? And this is some simple math that I think even a reading person like me can understand. Is 0.5, that would be 50%. So your decoding's not up to snuff yet, it's only about 50% there, but you have really strong language. So you understand oral language, but your decoding is weak. What happens to your reading comprehension? It's still at 50%. The decoding is the limiter. You can't get any better than your decoding. I don't care how good your language is. The formula says you're limited by your decoding. Now, the reverse is true. You could be a really good decoder and not understand the language. And then you're held back by your lack of language comprehension, and that's as good as your reading comprehension can be. And then there's the scary part, which is what if both are weak? So 0.5 or a half times a half, 0.5 times 0.5 is going to give you what? Only a quarter. And that's the times relationship. This is the misunderstood part, I think, often about the simple view. It's not plus. It's not an average. You can't support poor decoding with strong language. In the early grades, kids will look like they're doing that because they're using their strong language to predict or guess what the words are. But as anybody who's been a 4th grade teacher knows, by the time you get to 4th grade, it all falls apart, right? You get blamed for ruining that kid's life because they read just fine until they got to you, and you screwed them up. No, they had really high language that masked a decoding problem that people didn't pick up on. So, what this tells us is, if we want good reading comprehension, what does decoding have to be? Everyone. 1, or as good as possible, right? If we want good reading comprehension, what does language comprehension have to be? As strong as possible. Now, I'm assuming that everyone in the room is a good decoder, a good reader, but if I brought in let's say a physics master's level textbook, we could all decode it. But I don't know about you, but for me, my language comprehension, my ability to understand the language that I just read, I can pronounce it, I can figure out most likely what those words are, but if I don't have the vocabulary and the background knowledge, all of a sudden, what happens to my reading comprehension? It falls apart, not because of my decoding, but because of my language. So language comprehension can be a variable to the text. So if the text is outside your range of experience, no matter how well you decode, your reading comprehension could be limited by your language comprehension. So we need both to be strong if we want RC to be strong. RC can never be higher than the lower of either language or decoding. Sorry. What happens, guys, is the buttons are in a different place and my thumb goes there automatically without me looking or thinking where I'm going. Okay. Now here's the scary part again. If D and LC are less than good, then RC is only going to be, it's going to be less than either of those two. And, okay, sorry, when I lost my clicker, I lost my brain. So strong language can't make up for poor decoding, vice versa. Both have to be strong, and we're going to have to teach both. Put simply, here's the simple view. If you've got a strength times a strength, you get a strength. You got a strength times a weakness, or a weakness times a strength, you get the weakness. That's as good as you're going to be. And then the scary part is a weakness times a weakness produces even weaker. So we have to have both as strong as possible. For those of you that are interested in research, we put in a slide that just kind of gives you an outline of that original study that Hoover and Goff did. They tracked kids for 4 years, giving all 3 assessments, and then they crunched the numbers, and most of the time, very, very high correlations, if you know these, how statistics work, most of the time, a D score times an LC score would predict what the reading comprehension score was. And notice that it's stronger in 3rd grade than in 1st grade, because in 1st grade, there were a few kids that were fooling by getting better reading comprehension than their decoding or their language predicted because they were guessing accurately. But you can see that it's really falling apart by the time that masking is falling apart by the time we get to 3rd and 4th grade. Okay, so another piece of research, Hollis Scarborough is a researcher, and she made a map, essentially, of the path to fluent reading. I'm a visual person, so I like anything that I can see graphically. So this is kind of a picture of the simple view in a graphic form. And I've color-coded it to go along with my LC is going to be green and D is going to be red to go with our formula. And what Hollis is showing here is that over time, students learn individual skills. Those individual skills start to come together and form either decoding or language comprehension. And then at a certain point, your decoding becomes strong enough that you can read the language, and then you can read to learn as opposed to learn to read. And over time, that rope becomes tightly bound. But what happens to a rope if any one of the strands is not full strength? The rope is correspondingly that much weaker. So it's a visual of the simple view. If there's a weakness in any one of those strands, it's going to show up in the end game of reading comprehension. So over time in early grades, now the other thing I want you to look at is, notice that in the map, this rope model, language comprehension is one strand coming together at the top, decoding is another strand coming together at the bottom, but they are nowhere near each other. They are 2 entirely separate sets of skills, separate sets of learning, and separate sets of instruction. Got it? So they're 2 separate sets of instruction until you have enough skill in both for them to support each other, primarily that you have to have strong enough decoding. You have to have strong enough decoding if you're going to be reading the text to understand it. That will become important when we think about using our leveled and decodable readers. Okay. Now, the last piece of the simple view is that I maintain, and Linda, my business partner, maintains, that there is no such thing as a reading comprehension problem. There is either a decoding problem or a language comprehension problem, or both. Because we can't fix reading comprehension, we have to figure out, do we need to fix decoding? Do we need to fix language comprehension? Or do we have to work on both? But again, remember, those are two separate sets of instruction. Different sets of skills, and instruction will be different for both. So whenever somebody says, I've got a kid with a reading problem, I go, great. I wonder if it's a decoding problem, a language comprehension problem, or both. So everybody, what are the 3 questions that we ask when presented with a struggling reader? Read them out. Is it decoding? Okay. And so with that questioning in mind, once you get a clue, you can look at clues, you can look at anecdotal information, or you may have assessments that guide you to which realm you think it might be. And you all know the low language kids, you all know the poor decoders. There are signs and symptoms even without assessment that point you in the right direction, and then you do your diagnostic in that realm. You don't assess decoding problem if you think it's a language comprehension problem. You check that first, or vice versa. Okay. So that's our framework, guys. That's the research to set us up for thinking about our leveled and decodable readers. Any questions at this point before I leave the... Okay. Well, let's start talking about leveled and decodable readers. And I know you guys all probably know what they are, but good teaching tells me that I never assume anything. So I'm going to present quickly what they are, and you can ask questions, or we'll move on. Okay, so leveled readers. A leveled reader is usually considered to be an authentic text. It's a piece of text that has been leveled based on, first by doing word count, sentence length, length of words, vocabulary content perhaps, or even the comprehension content. They are generally considered to be of student interest, and we want them to be interesting to students. That's one of the goals of a leveled reader, is that it will be of interest to the students, so they want to read it, they want to learn from it. Some leveled readers have word banks, so that they have a controlled set of words for the earliest level, and then they'll just keep adding some words, and you can actually know what words the kids are being exposed to in each text and keep track of that. I'm sure that all sounds familiar to you guys. Early leveled readers. Now, we're thinking about using decodable and leveled readers for early reading instruction. That's our focus today. And I'll show you later when we're moved on from this early learning to read, and when you know that you have moved on from that. So early leveled readers are, you guys know, they're predictable, topic of interest, familiar subject, and subjects the kids already know about. So it's something they bring some context to, they have some language understanding. They use pictures a lot, and often they use the pictures so that you can predict what the word would be if you don't know what the word is. And I'll show you an example in a minute. They will have lots of high-frequency words because they want the kids to get exposed to lots of high-frequency words so that they start to become sight words, and they will repeat words a lot. Okay? So, what's the premise for the leveled readers? Guys, the premise of leveled readers is that students will learn to read by the whole word method, the sight word method, quite frankly. That's what they were designed for. The idea is that if you expose kids to literature or reading a material that they're interested in, they will try to figure out how to read it. As you work with them, helping them read it, they get the support from the pictures. They start to figure out what words are. Once they have been exposed to a word enough number of times, they start to recognize it in print. And some kids will actually figure out how the spelling patterns work. And that does work for some kids. Unfortunately, it does not work for all of our kids. If it did, we wouldn't have a problem because everybody could teach themselves to read. But you all know that not every child can teach themselves to read. So but that's basically the premise for the leveled readers. They were designed to help kids get that sight word exposure so that they could build their reading ability through sight word exposure. Sometimes phonics patterns are recognized in the leveled readers, but usually not. And when we look at the criteria, you'll see that. Now, these beginning leveled readers have awesome content in them, and keep that in mind, because if we're thinking about language comprehension, it's good fodder for language comprehension. You've got vocabulary, you've got pictures, you've got concepts that are all quite useful and can be used. We went online when we were putting this workshop together and started poking around to see what are some of the criteria that are used to level leveled readers. And many people know phonics A to Z. This is what they list. It's a whole lot of stuff. And I'm not going to read them all to you, but take a look at them and just notice, see if you notice anything that might be, well, let's start with the positive. What is this all about? What are all these criteria ultimately dealing with? I'm sorry? Words. And words have meaning, right? So the focus, guys, of this criteria is all about meaning. How complex is the text? Is it in the student's realm of knowledge? How long are the words? How complicated are the sentences? If they're really complicated, it's going to be a higher level. If they're shorter. So it's all about what the kids can do from the comprehension or the meaning side. But if you look carefully, you'll notice there's nothing in there talking about spelling patterns, phonics patterns. That was A to Z. I'm going to come back to this slide in a second. Fourtas and Pinnell, who are experiencing a resurgence right now, were kind of the creators of the whole concept of leveled books. So originally, leveled books were only leveled according to this criteria, which is a good bit shorter, as you can see. We think what happened was Fourtas and Pinnell created leveled books. This is how we leveled them. People said, oh, that's a great idea, let's do that. And then they said, oh, but we can add this. And then somebody else said, we can add this. And somebody else said, we can add that. And so the list doubled between these two slides. But you can still see what's the key issue that we're leveling for. It's about the content. It's about the vocabulary, the meaning, the understanding, which is great because we have a good sense of what that is from the leveling. Okay. So here is an example of, and I didn't bring my books. I brought them, but I forgot to get them out. But you guys have all seen leveled readers. This is an early emergent leveled reader. Oh, I wanted to go back to this slide first. Sorry. This is a slide I drew in. I put it in the wrong place. So this is from, I just ran into this last week. And I was doing a different workshop, and I saw this, and I thought, this is perfect for this workshop. This is from our RTI Flint Cooter, which is a running record type of assessment. So it's a 3-queuing system-based assessment looking at how students do when they read orally from connected text, and they do miscues and stuff. But what they did in their guide was to say, using our materials, how does that correspond with Fourtas and Pinnell's materials, which is kind of, like we said, the godfather, grandfather of guided reading. So for a pre-primer book and a primer level books, which would be A to D in guided reading levels, the assumption, and this is stated right there in the book, the assumption is, at this level, when students encounter an unknown word in print, they can easily use context from known words and illustrations, along with language patterns, cues, and early word analysis skills for successful decoding. But you see what comes first, and this is the problem. We're going to use the pictures and we're going to use the meaning to figure out how to read the word. And I hope you guys know enough from the research to know that's really kind of backwards from the way the brain reads. The brain sees the print, produces the corresponding sounds, figures out what the word is, and then figures out what the meaning is once the brain has figured out what the word is, and then the context provides the shades or appropriate meaning for that. And we know from brain scans that's what literally happens in the brain. Now, it happens in milliseconds, so you're not aware of it, but that's what happens. So this premise is a little bit skewed because I think it's coming from the wrong direction. And I think the research would tell us that. Okay, but let's look at an example of an early level reader. This is from the Houghton Mifflin. It's an older book, but this is 2 pages in the spread, and you can pretty much guess what the book's about. Foods We Eat is the name of it. And you've got pictures on each page. You've got a little bit of text on each page. But notice the words the long words. We've got orange. Orange is a unique word in English. You can't even come up with a word to rhyme with it, right? Okay, so not a very good pattern to build other words off of. You can't even rhyme with it. We've got banana. Now that's a perfectly decodable word if you know about schwa. But do you know about schwa in kindergarten? Okay. But take a look at the level reader here. And I want you to just think, what are some of the things that you, when you see that, thinking about that criteria, how do you know it's a leveled reader? What are some of the salient features that might classify it as a leveled reader? Repetition. Pictures, big pictures. Pictures take up the bulk of the page. Got high frequency words, our sight words. Anything else? I'm sorry? Text layout. Yeah, there's a big emphasis on the capital letter. And the text is one line, easy to read. and it's predictable. This is an, this is a, and if you don't know the word, you look at the picture and say what it is, as long as you know what the picture says. So yeah, that's great. Kids can figure out how to read this book. The question is, yeah, and it's a known concept, food, and you know it's not, it doesn't have kumquat or some of the less familiar foods in the book. Oddly, the book is all fruit except the second to last page, which is an egg. Okay, so we've got a bunch of fruit and an egg. I think that's personally, somebody dropped the ball on that one. And then the last page is unpredictable. It says, these are foods we eat. But, you know, it's a cute little read. All right, here's this next tier up, an emergent level reader from Houghton and Mifflin also. And this is a mosquito buzzed. And on every page, when you open the spread like that, the little buzz and the mosquito is the same pattern on every page. There's a mama bear, a baby bear, a daddy bear. The mosquito wakes all of them up. At the end of the book, Papa Bear is annoyed. He goes to smash the mosquito on the window, and he pokes a hole in the screen. Everybody goes back to bed, and then all the mosquitoes come swarming in. But that's not in the text. That's just a picture. But you can, from the picture, you can figure out what's happening. But if we're thinking about learning how to read, and we look at this, anybody notice any problems with the text for a first grade reader or a beginning reader? Any difficulties they might encounter? Mosquito. Yeah, now they know what a mosquito is, and there's a picture of one, and so they, you know, most kids have some concept. They might not know exactly what a mosquito is, but they know that there's a bug, and bugs can be annoying. So the concept's familiar, but we've got that word, mosquito. How do we spell, or excuse me, what does QU spell in English? What? So it should be mosquito, but the word comes to us from Spanish, where QU spells k, and hence it's mosquito. Okay. What about any spelling patterns? Anybody notice a repeated spelling pattern on the page? Okay, well that's the same word, but there's a spelling pattern in 3 different words that's the same. E-A-R. Okay, what does E-A-R spell in bear? What does it spell in near and ear? Okay, I'm confused. Is it ear or air? Which is it, guys? How do I know when it's which? So from a spelling patterns standpoint, this could be a confusing page rather than a helpful page. Okay. Yeah. Let me skip that. Okay, so that you got a sense of leveled readers. Interesting stories about what we know about. Text could be a little bit challenging for a beginning reader, but the pictures are there to support that. Now, decodable readers are text that has been controlled and limited to only the words that have spelling patterns that a student has learned. So a very beginning decodable text might be only short A's with a few high-frequency words that students have been taught. So it's controlled for what the student has been taught, and it's there for practice with what they've been taught. And we won't ask kids to read something that they haven't been taught how to read yet, because that encourages guessing. Okay? So the subject matter, anybody here had to try to write decodables? Yeah. I always tell the story. I got my start in reading as a volunteer. I wasn't even in academia. I was running a concrete construction company. But I volunteered to teach adult non-readers how to read. And one of the things we did at the Washington Literacy Council, this was in Washington, D.C., so we had lots of reporters in town, and they were always looking for volunteer things, and they were like, great, we can come help your adults. We'll write simplified versions of the news stories for them so that they can read the news as opposed to hearing about it. And we go, oh, that's really awesome. We'd love to have you do that. Now, this group of this group of adults are just learning about short vowels right now. So you're going to have to write your news story with only short vowels. Where'd you go? Gone. You can't do it. You can't. So decodables are not about the content because you're stuck by the words. And if anybody does write decodables, I've done a lot of it. The secret is develop your word list first and get your inspiration from the word list. Because if you try to come to it with an idea, and then make the words fit, it's not going to work. You have to let the words tell a story somehow. But anyway, so most decodables will start with the short vowel. You guys know why we start with short vowels? Anybody?
Point of articulation.
I'm sorry?
Point of articulation.
Okay. That's one reason. Any others? Okay, there are two that I know of. One is one letter, one sound. And we're talking about the vowels. The vowels, as you know, can be spelled lots of different ways. But short vowels, pretty much consistently, are spelled with the same letter. So short A is usually almost always going to be A. So it's one letter, one sound. That's a good starting place. Anybody teach math? Okay. Would you start kids in math with adding 100 plus 150? No. Where do we start math? We start with 0 to 9, one digit. Once we know those and know what they represent, and we can deal with 3 plus 3 or whatever, then we can learn about, we can put two of those together, get a bigger number, and we can do 10 through 99. When we can handle that, then we can take and add another digit, and so on. That's a systematic, explicit, logical approach to how to deal with numbers, right? Well, that's what phonics, scopes, and sequences, an explicit systematic phonics scope and sequence does. Start with one letter, one sound, and that's why we start with the short vowels and just consonants. We don't even start with diagraphs. We just have one consonant spelling one sound. So it's pretty straightforward. And you start to understand how does this process work. Then we get it more and more complicated because English is very complicated. That's one reason. The second reason for starting with short vowels, guys, is that almost 50% of our syllables in English are the short vowel pattern. One vowel not at the end, one vowel letter not at the end. So if you can read that syllable type automatically and accurately, then you have access to a whole lot of words. So it's a logical place to start phonics instruction. So most decodables will follow that kind of scope and sequence. Obviously, the point of a decodable is focused because the meaning is not there. The stories are pretty weak. The focus is on practicing reading the spelling pattern, learning that spelling pattern to automaticity. Interestingly, I don't know if you've thought about this, but I've noticed that the pictures, and many decodables have pictures, which is fine. Personally, I don't like them because I have too many kids that want to use the picture to figure out what the word is. But the problem in decodables is often the picture is not directly supporting what the words in the text are. They're actually rounding out the story a little bit, filling in something that we couldn't get because we needed a long vowel. And so the pictures are not necessarily going to be a literal translation of what the text is, which they will be more that in a leveled reader. In a decodable, they try to make the books a little more interesting by having more interesting pictures that fill in the story that we couldn't put in text. And I'll show you an example of that in a second, possibly. So obviously the premise for our decodable readers is to do what? Practice decoding. That's a good thing. So here's a decodable book, and this is from the Power Readers. Sopris West publishes this. Susan Evers is a friend of ours. And the book is, Gus is the name of the book, and it's about a pig, and mud is in the tub, Gus can rub in the mud is not hot, the sun is hot, but Gus is not. Ooh, that's some stimulating text, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to ask you a comprehension question. Are you ready? Why is Gus in the mud? Because it's hot. Yeah. Actually, that was a trick question. Gus is in the mud because this is a short U decodable book. And Gus is a short U, mud is a short U, tub is a short U, and that's really because that's how decodables get written. I'm writing short U, what can I do? But you could ask that question. That's a perfectly legitimate question to ask from this text. It's a straightforward, simple comprehension question. But that's not the point of the book. The book is not to figure out why Gus is in the mud. The book is to read accurately that Gus is in the mud, Gus is in the tub. Here's a little higher level decodable book, not much, but a little bit. And here's an example of the picture. If you were a first grader reading this, and you look at the picture, what would you possibly read for the first word? What do you see in the picture? The guy with the coat. What would you call the guy with the coat and the stethoscope? Yeah, he's a doctor. You don't even know what the word vet is because it's short for veterinarian, and you know, how many, I mean, some kids would know, but a lot of kids don't even have a clue what a vet is. But if you were encouraged to look at the letters and read the word, would you possibly read doctor for that first word? No, because it starts with a V. It couldn't be a doctor. And so then you're going to have to figure out what that word is, even if it isn't in your vocabulary. But you can, because you can decode at this level. And that's the point of a decodable. So, put you to work for a minute. Think about 3 ways that decodable books could be useful in instruction. What would you use them for? And then 3 ways that leveled books might be useful in instruction. Okay, I'm going to just start. Any volunteers for, let's start with decodable. What are we going to use decodable for? Any volunteers? Practice? Practice word patterns. Any word patterns? Or how would you refine that? Okay. Or we could say taught. We're going to practice reading word patterns that we have explicitly, systematically shown you. This is how it works. Short A, 1 vowel letter not at the end is always going to spell, or almost always going to spell, what sound, everybody? Ah. Okay, now we can practice that reading a short A decodable book. And you'll get practice. Okay? So we're going to use it to practice our decoding with taught, known, or the ones that we're learning, spelling patterns. What else can we do with it? Yeah, we're going to build fluency because that's the whole point. We're going to learn to read accurately. Once we get practice reading accurately, then it will become faster. And if we need to encourage, some more practice to get it faster, then we'll do that. So we're going to build our fluency based on accuracy. What other kind of words are going to have to be a few in a decodable? Those irregularly spelled high-frequency words, or even some decodable ones that we haven't learned how to decode yet, because you've got to be able to construct a sentence. You can't, it's just physically impossible to construct very many sentences if you don't have the, and is, and was, right? So would decodables be a good place to practice that we are learning those words and reading those words? Heck yeah. So we're going to learn to read our high-frequency words. We're going to learn to read the spelling patterns that we're learning about. We're going to do it for accuracy and then ultimately fluency. Okay. What about leveled readers? What can we do with leveled readers? Build vocabulary. Absolutely. We've got pictures. We've got the word. So we can do building vocabulary. What goes along with vocabulary? Knowledge. So we're going to build your knowledge, introduce you to some ideas, make connections to the ones you have. Okay. Anything else we could do with a leveled reader? Yes.
It builds reading fluency, because fluency is not just about rate, it's about stress, intonation, knowing when to pause the punctuation.
Yeah. The difficulty is you are only able to read cat, mat, sat, and maybe a couple other short vowels. In a leveled reader, they are not controlled for that. So you won't be able to read it. So I can't have you as a student learn to read fluently, but what I can do is have you listen to me read fluently, and then you could echo read, you could repeat it. I could read a couple of sentences to you, have you repeat, do an echo read so that you can feel what prosody is what you're describing, the expression. You can feel what that's like with my modeling. But recognize that I can't give it to you and say, read this, because you don't know how to read it yet on your own. So that's the distinction I want you to make. You are absolutely right. It is a perfect place to get kids used to the idea of what fluency sounds like, and even feel it if we're doing echo reads without having to guess the words.
But
Yes.
like when they have sight word knowledge and some of those sight words, when they're integrating the picture and the meaning, they can read it themselves.
Right.
They're just taking advantage of the meaning, so they are able to do it.
Because even if it said something
Yeah.
like, look at the tiger, said Bob, you would still be able to read that with...
If you knew what a tiger looked like and you could match it with a picture. The problem is, and here's what I want you to think about, is by asking kids to do that without first at least reading it ourselves, they might not know too much about tigers, that they know more about lions, and they look at the tiger and think it's a lion. And then they misread the word, which means that we're encouraging them to guess the word. So all I'm saying is absolutely, you can use it for that, but make sure that the kids know what the words are. And that's what I'm hearing from you, which is fine.
Yeah, you need
I just think that if we just hand it to the kid and say, read this fluently, or try to read fluently without that first step of making sure you know what it is you're reading, I'm encouraging you to guess.
yeah.
Right. And that's the key, is I don't want you to use the leveled readers to encourage kids to guess, which is what they're kind of designed to do. Use the picture to guess. Sort of the opposite of what we do with the decodable. Okay. What else could we do? There's some others that we talked about: building knowledge, building, vocabulary.
I mean, I said use them as a read aloud to model fluency
And that's how we need to use the leveled readers. Until the students are able to decode well enough on their own, we have to use them as read alouds or echo readings, so that we're going to get the content out there first. And sure, the kids can follow along and they can start to, copy us, but recognizing that we're going to provide the words first. There's one more thing I think we can do with leveled readers, and that is, if you go back to, real quick, could we teach about capital letter, punctuation, what a word is, spacing, all of those book concepts. That's what those are, And we can teach high frequency words, because we can read. I'm going to read this to you guys. This says this is an orange. Everybody repeat. This word is. Everybody, what does IS spell? Is. That's one of our high frequency words. So I can use it to reinforce that, but notice that I made sure I didn't have you guess what orange was. That's all. That's all I'm saying there. Okay. Now, I'm not going to read this slide to you or even talk about it because I simplified it, but you have it in your packet. Simply put, this is what we've talked about. Decodable readers are useful for practice reading our phonics patterns, our high frequency words, to develop our accuracy, and we can do some literal comprehension. We could ask, why is Gus in the mud? Because you can figure that out from that thing. But then on the leveled readers, we're going to focus on language comprehension and do read alouds and echo reading, and then use them to discuss and to develop our concepts of print, to build our vocabulary and knowledge. But think back to the rote model. We've got two separate strands of instruction, two separate strands of skills, and in the early grades, those aren't going to overlap. And hence, we have two sets of materials. So in the early grades, before you get to your decoding somewhere up in here, where it can start coming together, we'll do read alouds with our level or echo readings and do all the comprehension stuff we want to do. And then in a separate part of our instruction, we'll teach you explicitly about your phonics concept, a spelling pattern, and then we'll practice it in a decodable text where I can hold you accountable for reading 100% accurately because you know how to read those words. And you're practicing getting automatic at reading those words. Okay. Questions at this point? All right. Teaching strategies. I've mentioned, and I just showed you on the map, a point at which your decoding is strong enough that I can hand you a leveled reader if it's appropriately leveled and expect you to read it on your own. We think there's a point at which that makes sense. It's usually going to probably be somewhere towards the end of first grade. But I need to have taught decoding separately prior to this to make sure that, and I need to assess and make sure that you can decode up to that level accurately and easily. Otherwise, if I give you the leveled reader and say read it on your own, you're going to be facing words that you don't know how to read, and you are going to guess. And that's the wrong strategy. I'm sorry, guessing is not a good strategy. It's not what reading is about. It's not a psycholinguistic guessing game, as a certain Mr. Ken Goodman said. It's not about guessing. It's code. And you know how to read the code. You don't have to guess. You know exactly what the word is. And that's where we want our kids to be. So I told you guys I'm a visual person. We put together a map of reading skills to get you to that point of being able to read appropriately leveled towards the end of first grade, leveled materials independently to develop your comprehension. And I don't have time to walk through the whole map today, but just let me point out quickly to you. There is a green bar at the top. Everybody, what does the green bar say? Okay, then underneath of that is phonics. Guys, everything that is up here in the green boxes needs to be learned before phonics. And it's a whole other workshop I do, but I just want to plant that seed in your mind. Too often, kindergartners get thrown into phonics before they know enough about how speech sounds work, enough about letters and letter sounds for it to work at all when you put the two together, which is phonics. And that's where we start losing them, guys. And so one of the best things we can do for all of our kids is in kindergarten is to not put phonics in front of the kids, until they have all of these skills in place. And these are non-negotiable skills, guys. You can't sort of kind of have them. When I was teaching adult non-readers at the Washington Literacy Council, if they didn't have these skills, at age 58, guess where we went? We fixed these skills first because phonics was never going to... We started with Wilson, and they would tap all day long and never get a word because they didn't know how to blend sounds. Okay, let's fix that, and then we could go back to phonics. So these are non-negotiable. And then, we do have to build those irregularly high-frequency words, but a logical scope and sequence for phonics. Now, to get to the independent, not completely independent, but independent enough to give you leveled readers, you'll see, if you look at the criteria on that slide, it will get you somewhere down around in here. Okay? There's still more you have to learn. But if you get somewhere down around in here, being accurate, being reasonably fluent, then I can start to have you independently read those level materials to build comprehension. Any questions about the skills map, guys? It's a complex thing, but it literally is kind of a scope and sequence for how do you get to independent reading. Yes?
Are the top two sections meant to be concurrent?
Yes. Thank you for asking that. That's a good question. This is orthographic, which is the visual component. We need to understand the letters and the letter sounds and a few high-frequency words to be able to read sentences. And then on this side is all the phonological, the oral piece. And they are separate strands. They're not taught together. We wouldn't use print over here. We wouldn't use, there is sound over here, but it's over here. We're not going to show you print while you're learning about speech sounds. And it is a continuum from the easiest to hard, also going down the page. So that's how that operates. So what we're saying is, guys, in the early grades, when you're first learning to read, so kinder and first, our decoding instruction is a whole separate set of instruction. It has nothing to do with comprehension because your focus is about getting the word off the page. I'm going to ask a question. How many people here drive? Okay. Now I'm going to ask a question, and don't raise your hand because I really don't want to know the answer to this, but how many people here drive and eat a Big Mac, text their friends, put on makeup, read the paper, swat the kids in the back seat, all of those crazy things that we do that have nothing to do with driving? Okay, don't want to know. I've done a few myself. No makeup. I don't do that in the house. But guys, now I want you to think about when you first were learning to drive. If you can think to that. Is there any way you could have eaten a Big Mac in your first driving lesson while you were trying to drive? No. Why not? Because every ounce of your working memory and your memory and everything else, your whole brain was absorbed in trying to take in all the parts that you had to take in. When do I put my foot on the brake? Where is the brake? When do I look in the mirror? How hard do I push? What do I do when that car runs in front of me? You didn't have any brain space left to think about eating a Big Mac. But now you can. How did you get to being able to eat a Big Mac while you're driving? I actually hate Big Macs, but anyway. Sorry, how was it? I want you to say that.
Practice.
Say it 3 times.
Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, because it wasn't just practice. It was practice, 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 and then maybe practice some more, depending on how quickly you learn. And then, we all now can probably have all had that experience when you're driving down the road and you can't remember the last 5 minutes of driving because you zoned out thinking about something else, but you stayed on the road. How did you do that? It's called automaticity. This is what decoding needs to be. It needs to be so automatic that you can, rather than eat a Big Mac, you can think about meaning, and you can make connections, and you can learn from the text. But you cannot learn from the text if you're spending all of your energy going, oh my God, here comes a really big word. Oh, I got to think about the vowels. Oh. Meaning is gone, guys. And what happens when we, uh-oh, here comes a really big word. You skip the little words that you already know, and you miss something. And then you have to go back and start over again. And that's disfluent reading that leads to poor comprehension. But if you get the decoding to where you can drive and eat the Big Mac, then you can eat all the Big Macs you want. And like I said, guys, decoding doesn't go away. You got it, you got it. Okay. So what we're talking about is that skills map is talking about getting our readers to somewhere in here on that rope model. We still have more decoding experience to get, and we need to learn more things, but we can handle a basic level text and probably read it independently so that we can then build our learning from the decoding that we've done. So another way to look at this on the model is before we get there, while we're still learning about decoding, basic decoding, we're going to practice accuracy down here with decodable text. It's a totally different part of our lesson than when we get up here. Here we're going to do oral read alouds of the leveled readers to build content and knowledge and comprehension. And then eventually we'll get together where we can use them together and move on from there. Questions at this point? We finished at 3, right? I mean 2.
2, yeah.
Sorry, 2. Okay. Some other strategies. Guessing is not decoding. I said it's not a psycholinguistic guessing game. There is one way to read decodable words, and that's what we should read, and we need to do it accurately and easily. We need to be able to eat the Big Mac while we're doing it. Unfortunately, many leveled reader programs encourage guessing. And you will see posters on the wall that tell you, if you don't know the word, what should you do? Look at the picture. Look at the first letter, and then guess just on the first letter. Read to the end of the sentence, and then go back and figure out skip the word that you didn't know. Fill it in when you get to the end of the sentence. Does that sound like fluent reading to you? No, you all have seen those kids. I call it the running start. They get partway through the sentence, and then they kind of get a sense of, oh, I know where this is going. Okay, now I'm going to start over again, and now I can guess that word. That's not fluent reading. Look for parts of the word. Now, this last one, look for parts of the word, that would seem to make sense because you're supposed to be applying spelling patterns. But unfortunately, the same spelling pattern in a different word with other letters around it is not going to be necessarily pronounced the same in English. That's the problem. English is too complex. That's a sort of wannabe strategy, but it's not a good one. And it's also still guessing. So we want to just eliminate those guys. There's one way to read the word, use your decoding skills, and then we'll worry about meaning once you've decoded the words. So how do we get kids to read accurately in their decodables? We need to make it the habit. Now, when you're assessing kids for decoding, reading text that's decodable text, now I'm talking about decodable text. For assessment, I'm happy with like 98% accuracy for assessment, because if you can get to 98, you're well on your way to 100, and we can continue. But for instruction of any text, decodable or not decodable, if you're reading it aloud to me, my expectation is that you can read it 100% accurately. So I won't put text in front of you that I know you can't read 100% accurately. I will only put decodable text in front of you, if that's where you are still, that's decodable for what you've learned, and then I can hold you to 100% accuracy. Now, you're going to make mistakes. That's the practice that we need. I'll help you fix your mistake, and then we'll finish reading 100% accurately. So we will always finish reading 100% accurately. And I encourage this even in uncontrolled or leveled text. Don't let kids make the mistakes. If they make the mistake, let them finish the sentence and say, you read all the way up to here accurately? let's go back and look at this word. Can you figure it out? If not, I'll help you. Help them if you need to help them. Then they have to reread the sentence. Because otherwise, if we let a student read mom for mother, that's not the same word. And when we let a kid read for the, or mom for mother, or truck for train, shoes for feet, vice versa, we are telling them it's okay to guess and not even guess accurately. And kids don't know when they're guessing. They're not aware of it. It's a strategy that they've learned and they apply it without thinking about it, and they don't listen to themselves most of the time. You guys know this. They're not going to go back and fix it. Give you a sentence, guys. The horse got a cold. Make a picture of that. Oh, the horse got a cold. Got it? Tell me about your picture.
It's a horse with a Kleenex blowing his nose.
Okay, we've got a horse with a Kleenex blowing his nose. Okay, now I'm going to read that same sentence. Imagine it in your head, but I'm going to leave out the word The horse got cold. Did your picture change?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's just the littlest word in the language. Who cares if I leave out Nobody cares. Now, imagine that's in a passage, and we keep reading about the sick horse, except you have in your picture, in your brain, of a horse that's chilly, and you're like, why are they worrying about Lauren's college money that's going to have to pay for the vet versus just getting a blanket and a heater? That's so easy. And you guys have all experienced this. You get to the end of the passage, and you're going, let me see your passage, because that's not what I read. Because one bad guess leads to another bad guess, leads to another bad guess, if that's how we're trying to get through the text. Okay, so we need accuracy. We like to tell the students what they did right before we focus them on what they did wrong. So if you know how many words are in the sentence, it's real easy. You say, you read 10 words correctly. Let's look at this word. I always like to give the student a chance to fix the word on their own, because if they can, they usually can do it. They just need to be called attention to. You kind of goofed on that one. Apply your strategies. Do it your decoding strategies. That's the only strategy there is decoding. Use your decoding. Read the word. Reread the sentence. If you don't know how many are in the thing, just say you read to hear accurately. Try this word again. If you need to help them, help them. But try to get them to do some part of it. Okay. So leveled readers are going to be good for us to use for read alouds, echo readings, that sort of thing, to do all the content stuff, the comprehension. So we're on the language comprehension strand, but it's oral language until we're independent, and then the decoding will be the other. Talked about accurate reading, just kind of went through that. If you teach kids with enough practice in the early beginning phonics, with those short vowels, CDC, digraphs, moving into blends, if you practice accuracy to 100% practice, fluency for most kids will develop. It gets easier as they do it. And it becomes like you guys driving. You don't have to think about putting the foot on the brake. It's there when you need it. It shows up without you consciously thinking about it. The rest of the time, it just seems to happen magically. A few kids may need some extra help to just speed up the pace. But accuracy should always come before trying to speed them up. Because if they're still struggling with being accurate and you try to get them to go faster, you are saying, be sloppy, get on with it. And that's not what we want. We want you to be accurate first. So devote your time in the early grades or the early phonics lessons to getting that accuracy wired in the brain before you layer on the complex phonics. So beginning readers, decodable. All right. One last thing, or almost last thing. In your packet, we gave you directions from a packet that we have for free on our website, tracking charts. There's a directions page, but this is a tracking chart because if we're looking for accuracy, we need to track it. If we don't track it, we don't pay attention to it. We start to forget about it. And the students need to pay attention to it. They need to know that's their job. Your job is to read as accurately as you can. So what we do is we take a section up a passage. This is a decodable passage, or it could be a decodable book. We divide it into sections that we think are the appropriate length for wherever our students are. It might be shorter for some of our students, a little longer for some of our students. And we count the words. And if it's a book already published like that, you just put a sticky on the page and say, there's 22 words on this page. If it's something like this, you know, we counted them. And then the student reads their section of the passage aloud. You track what they do. And then at the end, you tell them how many they got right. They record it on their little tracking chart, which is in your packet. And the tracking chart has a place for whatever you're reading, the date. And then we give them 3 tries to get 100%. Now, if they can't get it in 3 tries, with you going over, you know, helping them fix any mistakes they made, try again. We need to move on because we have other students in the group that are going to have their turn to read. But that also is a clue to why are they not able to get it in 3 times. Either it's too much text at one time and they get tired, and we need to shorten the text so we get more fluent and more practiced, or we need to go back and check a concept that they missed somehow, and we need to go back and, you know, rehearse it in single words and build back up to that passage.
Are you, Michael, can I ask, are you measuring whether they read the word decoded automatically or they sounded out? Or
We're not.
do you
At
not
this
have
point,
right?
it's not about time. Your job is read 100% accurately. I'm not timing you, and I really don't care how long it takes you.
They can sound out.
And, oh, if they sound it out. Sounding it out is okay, but if you had to sound out a word, I would still have you reread. That would be a self-correction, kind of. Because by the time we're starting to read that connected text, you should have had enough practice with these things that you shouldn't have to sound it out. It's the strategy we want you to use, but we want to push you to that being able to do it without having to sound it out. So, okay, you sounded it out. I would say that's great. You read all the words correctly. Let's do it again for confidence. And that's what I do. I say, you read that 100% accurately. If they're really slow and choppy or they had to sound some words out, you read it 100% accurately. Awesome. Read it again for confidence. And they will read it better the second time. And if you want to do a third one, let's read it one more time for super confidence. And kids love it. They feel good. And they start to feel what fluency is going to feel like from a repeated read, essentially. Okay. I'm sorry, 5 minutes? Okay, great. I'm actually doing pretty well. So you guys can see how you can divide text up to do that. Please do not use the guessing strategies. Never say, look at the picture. If the student needs help with the word, help them with the words. One of the other things, guys, that kids, you need to watch for is kids are going to learn how to stop on a word that they're not sure of and look at you and wait for you to give them the word. And that's okay. But what I suggest is before you can give them or help them, because first I'm going to try to have them read it on their own or give them some help to read the word, especially if it's decodable, use your strategy, touch and say. If it's multi-syllable, how many syllables, read each syllable. Going to use those strategies, and you can do it on your own with a little bit of help from me. But before I even do that, they have to say verbally to me, word or word please. They have to own that they are looking for help. Because they get in the habit of just looking at us, and guess what happens? We spit out the word, or Sally Skilled, you know, the smart kid in the group, spits out the word, and they think they read it, and they keep on going. So watch for that. Eyes on the word is huge, and that's that, you know, looking away. Did I read it right? No. Keep your eyes on the word, read it again. You find yourself saying that 100 times, but eventually, after 100 times, they start doing it. It's habit change. Okay. This is awesome. I never finish early. Okay. For those of you that are in New York, I was just curious. I went and looked at the New York State Next Generation ELA Learning Standards, and under text complexity for expectations for kindergarten, they say students in kindergarten are at varying stages of development as word readers and text comprehension. So they are already telling you there are 2 pieces. There's word readers and language comprehension. So the standards acknowledge that there are 2 pieces, and then they say you need different instructional materials. So it's in the standards, guys. This is awesome. I was so excited to find that. Really, that's very cool. So, summary. Guys, what are we going to use decodables for? You tell me. Decoding, and what is our goal with decoding? I heard it over here. Accuracy. Everybody say accuracy. And what will most likely come once we have accuracy? Fluency. Yay. Okay? And what can we do with those wonderful, richly illustrated, complex text leveled readers? Read alouds to develop what? Anything to do with language comprehension. Guys, anything in reading that isn't teaching decoding is language comprehension. Everything in school that isn't teaching decoding is language comprehension. But if we don't teach the kids to decode, they're missing all the rest of school is going to be about reading to develop all of that. So fix decoding. If you have to make a choice, do decoding first. Comprehension, they got the rest of their lives to develop. But you got to get the decoding, and the earlier we can get it done and fixed, the better. Thank you for your time. I'm here if you have questions.